Grant Mercer arrived in Plainview, Nebraska in early March 2019 with a 6-year-old daughter named Lily, a 15-year-old pickup truck, and construction plans that made every farmer within 10 miles question his sanity. Plainview was cattle country, 3,200 residents spread across rolling grassland where ranching families had worked the same land for 4 generations. They knew weather, they knew construction, they knew what worked in Nebraska's unpredictable climate that could swing from pleasant spring mornings to violent supercells within hours. What they didn't know was why a single father with no ranching background had purchased the abandoned Hensley property on County Road 47, 40 acres of decent grazing land with a functional barn but no house, and immediately began building upward instead of outward. "He's building a cabin on top of his barn," Dale Ashford told his wife Karen over breakfast on March 15th, shaking his head. Dale had ranched in Cherry County for 38 years and thought he'd seen every kind of construction mistake city people could make. Not beside it, not behind it, directly on top, like he's planning to live above his cattle. Karen looked out their kitchen window toward the Hensley property visible across the eastern section line. Sure enough, wooden framing rose above the barn's roof, creating a structure that defied every principle of practical rural building. "Maybe he can't afford 2 separate buildings," she suggested. "Then he shouldn't be ranching," Dale responded. "That barn wasn't designed to bear residential weight. He's going to crack the foundation, weaken the whole structure, and end up with neither a proper barn nor a safe house." The Ashford assessment reflected community consensus. Grant Mercer's construction project violated conventional wisdom so thoroughly that local farmers discussed it at the co-op, the diner, and Sunday services with a mixture of amusement and concern. Tom Rutherford, who operated the largest cattle operation in the county with 800 head across 2,000 acres, stopped by the Hensley property on March 18th under the pretense of neighborly welcome, but actually to assess the stranger's methods. Grant was on the barn roof, positioning steel I-beams with professional precision that suggested construction experience. His daughter Lily sat in the truck cab, doing homework while occasionally looking up to watch her father work. "Afternoon," Tom called up. "Tom Rutherford from the R, 3 miles north. Thought I'd introduce myself." Grant climbed down, wiping sawdust from his work gloves. "Grant Mercer, appreciate you stopping by. That's quite a project you've got going." Tom gestured toward the elevated cabin framing. "Don't think I've seen anyone build residential space directly on a barn roof before." "It's not common," Grant acknowledged. "Structural concerns don't worry you? That barn's 40 years old. Adding living quarters on top seems like asking for foundation failure." Grant walked Tom to the barn's corner, pointing to the reinforcements he'd installed. "I've added 6 steel support columns running from the foundation to the elevated structure. They're anchored 8 feet into the ground with concrete footings rated for twice the load they'll carry. The barn's structural integrity is actually improved." Tom studied the engineering, recognizing professional work that exceeded hobby-level construction. "You've got building experience." "Some," Grant said without elaboration. "What brings you to ranching?" "My daughter needed open space. Fresh start after her mother passed 2 years ago." Grant's voice remained steady, but Tom heard the grief underneath. "This property had good bones, just needed adaptation." "Adaptation," Tom repeated, looking at the elevated cabin that would sit 20 feet above ground level. "That's one word for it. You planning to run cattle underneath?" 12 head, Angus breeding stock. They arrive next month. Living quarters 20 feet above cattle. That's going to be interesting for smell, noise, maintenance." Tom kept his tone neutral, but his skepticism was evident. "Weather exposure's another factor. Structure that high catches more wind. Nebraska spring storms can generate gusts that'll test any building, especially one elevated like that." "I've accounted for wind loads," Grant responded quietly. After Tom left, he joined Dale Ashford and 3 other ranchers at the Plainview diner, where the conversation inevitably turned to the strange construction project on County Road 47. "He's engineered it professionally," Tom admitted. "Steel supports, proper footings, calculations for load distribution. But the design itself is still questionable. Why live on top of your barn when you've got 40 acres to build on?" "City thinking," Dale suggested. Probably saw something on the internet about efficient use of space or modern homesteading. He said his daughter needs open space after losing her mother, Tom added. Single father trying to make a fresh start. Can't fault his intentions even if his methods are questionable. Sarah Chen, whose family had operated Chen Livestock Supply for 20 years, offered a different perspective. My grandfather built his house connected to his barn in California, said the shared structure provided thermal efficiency and reduced construction costs. Maybe this man knows something we don't. Or maybe he's making an expensive mistake we'll all learn from, Dale countered. Either way, we'll find out soon enough. Nebraska weather tests every structure eventually. His elevated cabin will either prove brilliant or collapse under the first major storm. By early April, Grant's construction had reached completion. The elevated cabin was modest, 800 square feet, divided into open living space, 2 small bedrooms, a compact bathroom, and a kitchen area. What made it remarkable was its position. 20 feet above ground level, supported by the barn's reinforced structure, and 6 independent steel columns that Dale Ashford grudgingly admitted looked professionally installed. The cabin's exterior showed attention to detail that surprised the neighboring ranchers. Heavy-duty steel roofing rated for 130 mph winds. Reinforced window frames with impact-resistant glass. Exterior walls that appeared significantly thicker than standard residential construction, suggesting serious insulation. He built that like he's expecting the apocalypse, Dale observed to Tom during a drive past the property. Those windows alone probably cost more than my entire roof replacement last year. What none of them knew was that Grant Mercer had spent 12 years as a meteorologist for the National Weather Service in Norman, Oklahoma, specializing in severe convective storms. He'd left the position after his wife Sarah's death from ovarian cancer, unable to continue the demanding schedule while raising Lily alone. The move to Nebraska wasn't random. Grant had studied 40 years of weather data for Cherry County, identifying patterns that most residents didn't recognize. The region sat in a convergence zone where moisture from the south met dry air from the west, creating conditions favorable for supercell development during spring months. May through June saw an average of 2.3 severe storm events annually, with hail, straight-line winds, and occasional tornadoes that the sparse population and rural construction methods left unprepared to handle. His elevated cabin wasn't eccentricity. It was precision engineering designed for specific threats that his meteorological training told him were statistically inevitable. The cattle arrived on April 12th, 12 Angus cows and 1 bull, all breeding stock Grant had purchased from a reputable operation in Kansas. The animals settled into the barn's ground level, seemingly unbothered by the residential structure above them. Lily Mercer started second grade at Plainview Elementary on April 15th, joining a class of 19 students where she was introduced as the girl whose dad built the house on the barn. The other children found this fascinating. Their parents found it concerning. "Is it safe?" Susan Martinez asked Grant during parent-teacher conferences. "Living that high with a young child?" "The structure exceeds residential building codes for wind resistance and load capacity," Grant assured her. "Lily's safer there than in most conventional houses." But Susan's question reflected broader community anxiety. The elevated cabin represented more than unconventional construction. It suggested that Grant Mercer either knew something they didn't or was dangerously ignorant of realities that rural Nebraska would eventually teach him. Dale Ashford's wife Karen actually felt sympathy for the single father trying to build a life for his daughter. She baked a welcome casserole and drove to the Hensley property on April 20th, finding Grant on a ladder installing what appeared to be a weather monitoring station on the cabin's elevated deck. "Brought you some dinner," Karen called up. "Figured you might appreciate a home-cooked meal." Grant climbed down with the same careful precision he applied to all physical tasks. "That's very kind. Lily and I definitely appreciate it." "That's quite in setup," Karen gestured to the monitoring equipment. "Weather station?" "Just basic instruments. Barometric pressure, wind speed, temperature, humidity. Most people check their phones for weather. Phones report general conditions. This provides site-specific data." Grant took the casserole dish. "Would you and your husband like to visit sometime? I'd be happy to show you the cabin design." "Dale's pretty set in his ways about how things should be built," Karen said diplomatically. "But he respects quality work, and I can see you've done this professionally." "I just approached the project differently than conventional construction," Grant replied. Sometimes different methods solve different problems. After Karen left, Grant stood in the evening light, looking across the 40 acres that now belonged to him and Lily. The barn below housed 12 cattle whose collective value represented most of his remaining savings. The cabin above represented his attempt to provide stability for a 6-year-old who'd already lost too much. And the weather monitoring equipment represented his one advantage in a community that didn't yet understand why he'd built the way he had. May was coming, and in Nebraska, May meant storms. If you're enjoying this story of overlooked expertise, please hit the like button below and subscribe to our channel. We share documented accounts of knowledge proving skeptics wrong every week. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. May arrived in Cherry County with deceptive calm, warm days, gentle breezes, and skies that looked incapable of violence. The kind of weather that made farmers relax into spring routines, planting crops and moving cattle to fresh pasture without concern for what the atmosphere might be preparing. Grant Mercer spent those calm May mornings on his elevated deck, watching weather patterns that most people never noticed. The subtle shift in wind direction at dawn, the way morning dew persisted longer on the western sections of his property, the peculiar stillness that settled over the landscape around 3 p.m. each afternoon, a pressure change so slight that conventional weather apps missed it entirely. His monitoring station recorded data that confirmed what his meteorological training recognized. The jet stream was setting up a persistent trough over the Central Plains, creating atmospheric conditions that would eventually produce significant convective activity. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. Lily noticed her father's increased attention to the instruments. Are big storms coming, Dad? Eventually, Grant said, checking the barometric pressure readings that had dropped 0.3 millibars in 6 hours. Weather works in patterns. Right now, the pattern is building towards something. Should we tell people? Grant considered his 6-year-old daughter's question carefully. The pattern I'm seeing won't be obvious until it's closer. If I tell people now, they'll ask why the official forecasts don't show anything serious. It's better to wait until the data is clearer. What Grant didn't tell Lily was that he'd already tried. 2 days earlier, he'd stopped by Dale Ashford's ranch with a printout of atmospheric models showing developing instability. Dale had listened politely, then pointed to his phone showing clear skies for the next 10 days. I appreciate the concern, Dale had said, but the National Weather Service isn't predicting anything unusual. Your personal weather station is probably reading things differently than the official equipment. Grant had left without arguing. He understood the psychology. Why would experienced ranchers trust a newcomer's interpretation over established forecasting services, especially a newcomer whose construction choices already marked him as someone who did things differently? Tom Rutherford noticed Grant's weather monitoring during a fence line conversation on May 8th. That's quite a setup you've got up there. Professional grade equipment? Mid-range research quality, Grant replied. Gives me site-specific data that general forecasts miss. Expecting something the Weather Service isn't? Grant chose his words carefully. I'm tracking atmospheric trends that suggest increased severe weather potential later this month. Nothing imminent, but conditions are aligning in ways that concern me. Tom studied the younger man, noting the precision of his language. You talk like you've got training in this. Some background in meteorology, Grant admitted. Enough to recognize patterns. And those patterns tell you something's coming that the professionals aren't seeing? The professionals see it too, Grant corrected. But seasonal forecasts work in probabilities, not certainties. I'm just paying closer attention to how those probabilities are developing locally. Tom nodded slowly. Fair enough. If you see something specific, let us know. Most of us have been through enough spring storms to know they're coming eventually. We just don't usually get much advance warning out here. That was the problem, Grant thought, after Tom left. Rural Nebraska didn't get the storm prediction infrastructure that urban areas took for granted. Warning times were shorter, resources were thinner, and when severe weather hit isolated ranch country, people relied on experience rather than preparation. His elevated cabin wasn't just about surviving storms, it was about having the high ground to see them coming, the structural integrity to weather them, and the equipment to track them with precision that might save lives beyond just his own. The community remained skeptical, but Grant's quiet competence in daily ranching tasks earned grudging respect. His cattle were well managed. His daughter was polite and well-adjusted. His construction, however unconventional, showed no signs of structural problems. But the whispers continued at the co-op and the diner. The single father who built the cabin on the barn, living 20 feet in the air like he knew something nobody else did. And in the gathering atmospheric instability that May was quietly preparing, Grant Mercer did know something. He knew exactly what was coming. He just didn't know if anyone would believe him until it was too late. May 17th brought the kind of morning that made Grant's hands shake while checking his instruments. The barometric pressure had dropped 1.2 millibars overnight, a rate of change that signaled atmospheric violence preparing to unleash. The wind had shifted to southerly flow, pulling Gulf moisture northward into an environment primed for explosive convection. Grant pulled Lily from school at noon, ignoring the questioning looks from staff who saw clear skies outside. "Big storm tonight," he told his daughter while securing their cattle in the reinforced barn. "We need to be ready." By 2 p.m., Grant was knocking on doors across the rural neighborhood. Dale Ashford's first. "Storm's coming, not tomorrow. Tonight. Probably around 8 or 9 p.m., you need to move your cattle to shelter and secure anything loose." Dale looked at the sunny afternoon sky, then at Grant's serious expression. "The Weather Service says—" "I know what they're saying. They'll update the forecast in about 3 hours when the convective models refresh. By then, you'll have less time to prepare." Grant handed Dale a printout showing atmospheric data that looked ominous even to untrained eyes. "Supercell development is probable, possibly tornadic. Your conventional barn isn't reinforced for extreme winds." Something in Grant's tone, the professional precision, the lack of exaggeration, made Dale reconsider. "You're certain?" "As certain as meteorology allows. The pattern's locked in now. It's happening." Tom Rutherford received the same warning. So did the Chens, the Martinezes, every ranching family within 5 miles. Some dismissed it. Others, remembering Grant's professional weather station and precise construction methods, started taking precautions. By 4 p.m., the National Weather Service issued a severe thunderstorm watch. By 5 p.m., it upgraded to a tornado watch. Grant's early warning had given families 3 extra hours to prepare, time that would prove critical. Karen Ashford called Grant at 6 p.m. "Dale's moving our cattle. He said you warned us this morning. How did you know before the Weather Service?" "I've been watching the pattern develop for 2 weeks, Grant replied, checking his instruments as the first towering cumulus appeared on the western horizon. "The official models update every 6 hours. My equipment updates every minute. I saw it coming sooner." At 7:30 p.m., the sky turned the color of old bruises. The wind died to eerie stillness. Grant stood on his elevated deck with Lily safely inside the reinforced cabin, watching a wall cloud form 15 miles west, a rotating mass of moisture that marked a supercell in full development. He grabbed his radio. "This is Grant Mercer on County Road 47. I've got visual on a wall cloud west of Plainview, moving northeast at approximately 30 miles per hour. Recommend immediate shelter." The tornado formed at 8:17 p.m., a wedge of violent rotation that touched down 3 miles southwest of the Ashford property. Grant tracked it with professional precision, calling positions to anyone monitoring emergency frequencies while keeping Lily calm in their elevated fortress. His cabin, built 20 feet high with wind-rated materials, barely shuddered as 90 mph straight-line winds hammered the area. Below, his 12 cattle sheltered in the reinforced barn that had been engineered to withstand forces that conventional structures couldn't match. The storm passed in 40 minutes. No lives lost, some property damage. But the families who'd heeded Grant's early warning had secured their livestock, reinforced their buildings, and taken shelter before the worst arrived. Dale Ashford stood in his yard at 9 p.m., looking at his intact barn and safe cattle, then at the elevated cabin glowing with warm light across the section line. The single father who'd built the foolish structure had just saved his operation from catastrophic loss. Tomorrow they'd ask him how he knew. Tonight, they just thanked God someone had been watching the sky with eyes trained to see what was coming. The morning after the storm brought a quiet procession of trucks up County Road 47. Dale Ashford arrived first, finding Grant feeding his cattle in the barn that had sheltered them through 90 mph winds without a single structural failure. "You saved my operation," Dale said without preamble. "My conventional barn lost part of its roof. Took 3 hours last night moving panicked cattle to the equipment shed. If I'd moved them before the storm, like you said, I'd have saved myself the chaos and them the terror." Grant continued measuring feed. "Glad everyone's safe." "Safe because you warned us." Dale studied the younger man with new understanding. "You're not just a single father who builds strange cabins. You're trained in this. Professionally trained." Grant nodded. 12 years with the National Weather Service, storm prediction and analysis. I left after my wife died because the schedule didn't work with raising Lily alone. "And the elevated cabin?" "Cherry County sits in a convergence zone. I studied 40 years of weather data before buying this property. Knew severe weather was statistically inevitable. Built accordingly." Grant gestured to his monitoring station. "The elevation gives me visibility. The reinforced structure handles wind loads that conventional buildings can't. The design works because it's based on meteorological reality, not tradition." Tom Rutherford arrived next with Karen Ashford. They'd spent the morning assessing damage across the community. Twisted metal, damaged roofs, frightened livestock. But no injuries, no catastrophic losses, primarily because Grant's 3-hour warning had given families time to prepare. "How much damage did you suffer?" Tom asked. "None," Grant replied. "The cabin performed exactly as designed. Minimal stress on the structure even during peak winds." Tom looked at the elevated structure with professional respect. "You didn't build a house on a barn. You built a storm observation platform that happens to have living quarters." "Essentially, yes. Out here, severe weather warning time is limited. Being able to see storms develop and track them accurately gives the community better information than waiting for official updates." Sarah Chen arrived with a proposal. "Grant, the County Emergency Management Office wants to talk to you about formal weather spotting. You've got professional credentials, equipment, and elevation they can't match with conventional systems. Would you be willing to serve as an official storm spotter?" "Of course," Grant said. "That's partly why I built this way, to be useful to more than just myself." By afternoon, word had spread throughout Cherry County about the meteorologist who'd hidden in plain sight. The single father whose foolish elevated cabin had proven to be sophisticated emergency infrastructure that had protected an entire rural community. The Plainview diner became an impromptu gathering place where farmers who dismissed Grant's construction methods now asked detailed questions about storm prediction, structural engineering, and the atmospheric patterns that made Nebraska's spring so dangerous. "I laughed when I saw you building up there," Dale admitted publicly. "Thought you were wasting money and timber on city ideas that wouldn't work in ranch country. Turns out you were the only one building smart enough to survive what we all knew was coming eventually." Grant shook his head. "You all survived storms through experience and resilience. I just had different tools for preparation. The elevated structure gave me advantages in observation and protection, but your knowledge of this land and your livestock management skills are just as valuable." "Different tools," Tom repeated. "That's generous, considering we called your methods foolish." "You called them unfamiliar," Grant corrected gently. "There's a difference. What works in one context doesn't always translate to another. I brought meteorological training to ranching. You brought generational knowledge I don't have. Both matter." Karen Ashford stood up with emotion in her voice. "Yesterday morning, I thought you were overreacting. By evening, I was grateful my husband listened to you. My children were safe because you saw what was coming when nobody else did. That's not just different tools. That's wisdom we need to learn from." The community's transformation was quiet but complete. The single father with the strange elevated cabin became the neighbor whose expertise had proven invaluable when it mattered most. And on the elevated deck 20 feet above his cattle barn, Grant Mercer continued monitoring atmospheric patterns, knowing that May's storms weren't finished yet. The next one wouldn't surprise anyone. Not anymore. 6 months after the May storm, Cherry County looked different. Not in its landscape, but in how its residents approached severe weather preparation. Grant Mercer's elevated cabin had become more than a home. It was the community's unofficial storm observation center, equipped with professional-grade instruments that provided warning times no conventional system could match. Dale Ashford rebuilt his barn with reinforced construction methods, consulting Grant on wind load calculations and structural engineering that traditional ranching knowledge had never required. Tom Rutherford installed his own weather monitoring station, learning to read atmospheric pressure changes that signaled developing storms hours before official warnings. The County Emergency Management Office designated Grant as their primary severe weather spotter for the region, providing him with enhanced communication equipment and integrating his reports into official warning systems. His elevated position and meteorological expertise filled a critical gap in rural weather infrastructure. But the most significant change was invisible, a shift from dismissing unfamiliar methods to asking why someone built differently. When Sarah Chen's son proposed an unconventional irrigation system based on soil science research, farmers listened instead of laughing. When a new family arrived with solar panel plans that seemed impractical, the community asked questions before making assumptions. Grant's daughter Lily, now 7, had become the school's unofficial weather expert, teaching her classmates to read cloud formations and recognize atmospheric patterns. Her second-grade class tracked storms with the same instruments her father used, learning that knowledge could protect communities when shared rather than dismissed. On a quiet November evening, Grant stood on his deck with Dale and Tom, watching winter storm clouds gather over the western horizon. His instruments showed another significant system approaching. Not tornadoes this time, but heavy snow and dangerous cold. "Looks like we've got 18 hours before it hits," Grant said, checking his data. "Enough time to move cattle to shelter and secure equipment." Dale nodded, pulling out his phone to alert neighboring ranchers. "6 months ago, I would have waited for the weather service to tell me. Now I know better." "We all know better," Tom added. "The man we called foolish for building up high turned out to be the smartest one in the county." Grant shook his head. "I just had different information. You had different experience. The real foolishness would have been if we hadn't learned to combine both." As the 3 men headed inside Grant's elevated cabin, the structure that had once been ridiculed and now served as a gathering place for community weather planning, the lesson was clear. Wisdom often appears foolish until circumstances reveal its value. And the greatest knowledge comes not from dismissing what we don't understand, but from having the humility to learn from those who see the world differently. The farmers had laughed when Grant Mercer built his cabin over the barn. They weren't laughing anymore. They were listening, learning, and building better because of what one single father with specialized knowledge had shown them about preparation, expertise, and the courage to do things differently even when everyone called you wrong.